All right, we're back. I hope you've been unsettled by the truths that we talked about in the last video. I hope that you continue to be unsettled by those truths. I hope you've been disturbed and shaken in very deep places in your spirit, in your social life, in your political life, in your religious life. That's where we need to be as a nation, is unsettled, so that we can move towards something better. How are we going to get there? How do we go about it? What do we do? That's what we're talking about today. So where do we go? Where do we go and how do we get there? In Garfield Memorial Church, we've been talking about reconciliation and the significance of that and how hard that is. Soong-Chan and Mark Charles say that reconciliation isn't even a great word. They think a better word is conciliation. They say reconciliation implies a previous positive relationship, healthy relationship we're trying to get back to, and there's never been healthy relationship between the white majority in North America and people of color, whether those are African Americans or Native Americans, indigenous folks, or other people of color that have immigrated to this country. We have too long and too solid a history of bad relationship to be reconciled, so we need conciliation. Whichever word works for you, the question is, how do we get there? How do we move toward that? And Ra and Charles offer some, I think, profoundly simple yet profoundly difficult guidance in that direction. And first of all, I think it's important, it's incredibly important who we listen to, whose voices we listen to, whose stories we listen to when we are seeking conciliation or reconciliation. Think of it this way. Imagine a family with a husband and a wife and 3 kids. And the husband is an abusive alcoholic. And he drinks a lot, and he drinks more and more and more as time goes on. And when he's drunk, he's verbally abusive, he's emotionally abusive, he's physically abusive. He squanders the family's finances, he leaves them in poverty and struggling. Then he's arrested and sent to jail, maybe for the abuse itself, maybe for some other crime that he committed. And then years later, after his family's been struggling to survive and move on in their lives, he gets out of jail and he comes back to them and says, we need to be reconciled. He wants to be reconciled. Maybe he has a genuine desire to be reconciled, and he really sees the wrong that he's done, and he wants to see reconciliation, and he wants to pursue it. Now, here's the key thing. That father and husband can come back with sincere, unequivocal apologies. He can come back with a sincere, genuine desire to repent, to think differently, and to do differently. He can come back with a willingness to spend the rest of his life making amends for the horror that he brought into the lives of his wife and his children. But what that husband can't come back with is the plan for how to be reconciled. That needs to come from the wife and from the kids. See, the plan, the process, the details and working outs of this is what needs to happen for us to be reconciled, that has to come from the folks that have been abused, not from the abuser, whether reformed or not. So if we really want conciliation or reconciliation, we need so much to listen to the voices of the people who have suffered under white supremacy, not to white supremacists who are reformed, genuinely reformed or not. We've got to listen to the voices of the people who've been hurt. All right? And that's one of the reasons I'm listening to Mark Charles and Soong-Chan Ra. They come out of traditions and life experiences of having suffered under white supremacy. So I think they're good voices to listen to. They're not the only ones, but they're good ones. And again, strongly encourage you to get their book. There's a link below in the comments to Amazon.com where you can get their book in physical format or digital format and read it. There's a lot of other great books you can check out too. So what do Ra and Charles have to say? To see that, we're going to read directly from their book again. George Erasmus, an Aboriginal leader from the Dene people in Canada, says, where common memory is lacking, Where people do not share in the same past, there can be no real community. Where community is to be formed, common memory must be created. The United States of America has a white majority that remembers a history of discovery, opportunity, expansion, and exceptionalism. Meanwhile, our communities of color have lived experiences of stolen lands, broken treaties, slavery, Jim Crow laws, Indian removal, ethnic cleansing, lynchings, boarding schools, segregation, internment camps, mass incarceration, and families separated at borders. Our country does not have a common memory. The United States of America needs a national dialogue on race, gender, and class, a conversation on par with the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions that took place in South Africa, Rwanda, and Canada. It must be an inclusive dialogue, not one that takes place in specific silos, and the church must be involved. But because the American church has so broadly accepted the heresy of Christian empire, and because the Western church wrote the doctrine of discovery, the church is currently incapable of leading in this dialogue. It needs to participate, but it cannot lead. We have to be, as the church as a whole, and as Christians and members of the church, if you happen to be a Christian and part of a church, we need to be part of the dialogue, but we cannot presume to lead. This is what they say in the end. Our only path to healing is through lament and learning how to accept some very unsettling truths. The path to healing begins, I believe, with accepting these unsettling truths. That's what I talked about at the end of the last video, emphasized at the beginning of this one. We need to accept the truths and we need to allow them to unsettle us. We need to allow these truths to move beyond our head and into our hearts. Allow them to touch us physically, emotionally, spiritually, deeply to the core of our being as individuals, as communities of individuals, as communities, social communities, cities, and nations. We need to allow these truths to unsettle us. And as they unsettle us, our response needs to be not a quick hurrying past, not a rush to praise God for showing me the truth, now I can get on with my life. And it can't just lead to feeling sorry and then coming up with simple, easy solutions. A little hugging, singing a few songs, and everyone going home, and life just continuing pretty much as it is. It also we can't just stay there and just feeling bad. Just staying there and feeling bad doesn't help anyone. The feeling bad, the unsettledness, the horror of this needs to move us someplace. If it just leaves us horrified without any movement, without any action, then nothing good has come of it. Ra and Charles say it needs to move us first to lament. Now, lament is a word rich in biblical tradition. Soong-Chan, in fact, has written an entire book called Prophetic Lament. I encourage you to get that one as well, so I put a link to that one in the description below too. And I'm not going to try to redo all of that book now. We might get to that in 2021 sometime. But lament has to do with accepting truth as it really is, and allowing it to disturb us and distress us and bring us to our knees. Lament means we've reached a point where we've given up on our own capacities and our own resources to solve and resolve the problem. And we cry out to God for justice. And we seek God and His justice. But to seek God and His justice, we have to first seek God and His truth. Confession isn't simply admitting a wrong. Confession is seeing things as God sees them. When I look at a situation and see it as God sees it, and then I can confess this is the truth about the situation. When I can look at Christopher Columbus coming to America, if I'm going to confess that event, I can't say he discovered America, because how can you discover a place that already has people living in it? Christopher Columbus came to America, and he began enslaving the natives and destroying the natives through disease and through warfare. And the other European countries followed And colonists followed, and they continued that process, not of discovery, but of warfare and conquest, of stealing land that belonged to others. When we confess it, we look at the westward expansion of first the colonies and then the United States to reach from sea to shining sea, and not gloriously view that as a manifest destiny that we are the new Israel, because we're not, but as a process of empowered by white supremacy, blessed by the church, to commit genocide against the natives indigenous to this land so that we could take the land from them and benefit from the taking. That's confession. When we cut through the myths and we cut through the whitewash and speak the truth about what it is, the truth as God sees it. And those unsettling truths, when we confess, then we can lament, we can grieve what we have done. We can grieve for those who have been the victims of white supremacy and manifest destiny and the doctrine of discovery and wars of discovery. They can grieve and be allowed to grieve and be angry about the injustices perpetrated on them, whether through genocide or enslavement or Jim Crow or internment or reservations or whatever. They can grieve the injustice done to them, and those of us who have benefited from those injustices can grieve along with them for our part in that, or the part of our ancestors in that, or for the good things that have come to us, and that's not even the right way to say it, through the financial prosperity and political power that have come to us because of those things. To grieve those things, to lament those things, to cry and weep over those things. And then to move to seek and pursue real justice. Not just feeling bad, hugging and going home to continue life as usual, but how do we make it right? In recovery circles, they call that making amends. How do we devote our lives, the remainder of our lives from the lamentation forward, how do we devote the remainder of our lives to making amends to those who have suffered the injustice? That's the route we need to go. While we're walking that road together and following that journey together, I hope you will keep listening to stories, and I hope you'll keep telling yours. As you're listening to stories, I challenge you this. Listen to the stories of people who are ethnically different than you, particularly if you're white. Seek out the stories of people who are racially, ethnically, culturally different than you are. For all of us, let's listen to the stories of people who are economically different from us, people who are educationally different from us, people who are nationally different from us, people who are politically different from us. Listen to those stories and hear in them the voice of God. Keep listening to stories. Keep telling yours.